Members of the so-called Democratic Party resistance haven't shown that they've been very successful or effective at all at resisting Donald Trump or the Republicans, but they're really great at resisting progressives. They've shown this time and again, and we have yet another example as to how the Democratic Party establishment is trying to embolden establishment candidates in an effort to shun progressives. So after corporate Democrat Ruben Kihuen of Nevada's 4th Congressional District announced that he would not be seeking re-election in 2018 after sexual harassment allegations came to light, his progressive challenger, Amy Vilela, and only primary opponent, automatically became the presumptive Democratic Party nominee in that district until, however, the Democratic Party establishment predictably decided to do what they do best. And all of a sudden, establishment Democrats that are prominent in Nevadan politics decided to throw their hats in the race. It's kind of the same way as to how Keith Ellison was gaining a lot of momentum to be the DNC chairman, and Tom Perez just decided to suddenly jump into the race in order to stop Keith Ellison from winning. Now, as you all know, Tom Perez didn't necessarily decide to run on his own accord, but instead was influenced to run by President Obama. And we all know how that turned out. It turns out the establishment voted for the establishment, and he did become the DNC chairman. So even though we don't have evidence that that's necessarily happening here, it seems as though the establishment in Nevada didn't really like the idea of Amy Vilela running, because Amy Vilela, she probably wouldn't be too good for the Democratic Party's donors. I mean, she's in favor of Medicare for all. The health insurance industry donors that the Democratic Party have, that probably terrifies them. So the establishment in Nevada probably decided to push other candidates in the race just to make sure that Amy Vilela isn't the only one running and doesn't win. So who is now running against Amy Vilela? Well, she has two primary opponents that are more prominent, but the first one I want to talk about is Stephen Horsford. So Stephen actually represented Nevada's 4th Congressional District before, but his constituents apparently weren't too fond of him, seeing that he was actually voted out of office after just one term, losing to Republican Crescent Hardy. And after he lost, he then decided to move to Washington, D.C., where he became a lobbyist. And now that that seat is open, again, he decided to throw his hat back into the race after previously losing. Now, even though his constituents clearly weren't satisfied with him since he lost, well, of course, since Amy Vilela became the favorite, he had to jump into the race to make sure that a progressive doesn't win that seat. But I mean, realistically speaking, he can't just be running to prevent Amy Vilela from winning, right? Well, of course, that's probably not the case. So what is it that he stands for? Well, when it comes to policy, we don't really know what he stands for because he hasn't voiced the policies that he supports. In fact, in his campaign announcement ad, he basically just says that he's running because he's against Trump. And I'm not exaggerating.
Like so many other people, I'm disgusted with Donald Trump, with the Republicans in Congress, and their reckless agenda. They have voted to take away health care for millions of Americans. They've passed this tax scheme that only benefits the richest. And they have begun to strip away at our basic civic and human rights. Enough is enough. It's going to take all of us to make government work for all of us. So let's get to work.
I'm disgusted with Donald Trump.
So obviously, there wasn't much of anything there about policy. So I mean, he can't possibly be running just because he opposes Donald Trump, even though it seems that way, and also because he doesn't want Amy Vilela to win. I mean, so why is it that he jumped into the race? What's the point of Stephen Horsford running? Well, he recently told the Nevada Independent, quote, "I'm not running against anyone in the primary. I'm running for the district," he said. Okay, well, that's fantastic. So what exactly does he stand for? Well, as the Nevada Independent explains, he said he supports impeaching Trump, citing his erratic behavior and the role that he and others in his campaign appear to have played in collusion with Russia to influence our election. I wonder why the people of Nevada's 4th Congressional District voted him out of office after just one term. It's almost as if voters are smart and they knew that he was bullshitting them. But look, even though we have just this one ad and this article doesn't state his policy positions, clearly there's got to be more, right? Well, actually, no. When you check out Stephen's website, which is the main hub for his campaign, where all the information should be, it's clear that there's not much going on here either. And when you click on the About Stephen page, you see that he stands for, quote, responsibility and perseverance, expanding opportunity, winning the tough fights, and running a small business. And then he has a sign-up page, and that's literally it. So by looking at Stephen's website or listening to him speak, it's really difficult to discern what he stands for and why he decided to run at all. But one metric that you can always use to gauge what a politician stands for is to look at their donor list. And when you look at Stephen's list of 2014 donors, well, I completely understand why he was kicked out of Congress after just one term. His donors in 2014 alone included MGM Resorts International. They contributed $10,000 to his super PAC, the National Association of Realtors, the American Bankers Association, Comcast, I wonder where he stands on net neutrality. McDonald's, I wonder how hard he's going to be fighting for a $15 minimum wage for fast food workers. Capital One, Cox Enterprises, Home Depot, Walmart, AT&T, Lockheed Martin, so he's also being bankrolled by the military-industrial complex. Citigroup, Verizon, I bet a Jeep Pie is going to love Stephen Horsford, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, American Express, and more. So by looking at that, you know exactly who Stephen's going to be fighting for. It's not going to be the people of Nevada's 4th Congressional District. It's going to be his donors, defense contractors, big banks, internet service providers that are against net neutrality like Verizon, Cox, and AT&T. So I don't know why he decided to run. And Stephen was so brazen about his corruption as a state senator that he literally had to rescind a letter he wrote to potential donors promising them a dinner with him if they donated between $10,000 and $25,000. And if his shameless corruption wasn't enough, well, there's also this. Quote, Horsford-led IFC may have illegally plundered millions from college savings plan. So that's who decided to throw their hat into the race, presumably to stop Amy Vilela from winning. Someone who is brazenly beholden to his financial contributors, because he doesn't stand for anything. Clearly, all he has is, I'm like against Trump.
I'm disgusted with Donald Trump.
So what do you stand for? Well, clearly, the establishment loves you because you raise a lot of money and you were sent there to stop Amy Vilela from winning. Now, if I'm incorrect here and I'm jumping to conclusions, then prove me wrong. Make sure that when you run this time, you don't have a super PAC and you don't take financial contributions from large multinational corporations and billionaires, and also from the banks that crash the economy. Prove me wrong. Do you think he's going to do it? I don't think so. But Stephen isn't the only one who decided to suddenly get into the race, presumably to stop Amy Vilela from winning. Another individual that just announced her candidacy is Pat Spearman, or as I like to call her, Platitude Pat, and you'll see why I call her that in a minute. She's actually been a state senator for quite some time, and a lot of progressives actually feel alienated by her because she aligned herself with the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party. In fact, after she gave a speech at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, some progressives actually alleged that she threw shade at Bernie Sanders delegates and refused to speak with them when they requested it. And this makes sense, especially when you look at her Twitter feed, because it looks like a typical Clintonista Twitter feed that's just littered with retweets about Hillary Clinton and retweets from Hillary Clinton and also Obama worship. So those are the typical characteristics you see from a typical Hillary Clinton loyalist. But that's fine. That doesn't really tell us much about Pat Spearman. But what we can learn from Pat Spearman is what she's deciding to run on. Now, although she doesn't have a campaign announcement video yet, she actually just spoke at the Women's March. So if we look at her speech, maybe we can learn a little bit about Pat Spearman. And one thing that I did learn is that there's no doubt that she is one of the most charismatic speakers I've seen in a long time. She's great at speaking. The problem is that even though she's saying something in a way that sounds important, really what she's saying completely lacks substance. So her speech was about 11 minutes. You can watch it yourself at the link down below. This is basically what she talked about in a nutshell.
I need you to turn to two people and say, we are the resistance. The resistance. Resisting. Resisting. The resistance. Resistance. The resistance. Rise up. Resist the resistance. All the resistance. Accessible and affordable health care. The resistance. The resistance. The resistance. Resistance. Me too. The resistance. The resistance. Me too. Resist the resistance. The resistance. The resistance. Resistance. The resistance. Human rights. Reproductive rights. Workers' rights to earn a living wage. Women's rights codified in the U.S. Constitution. The resistance. Resistance. Stronger together and we resistors. 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 When they go low, we go high. Stronger together. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the great state of Nevada.
Now, you might have missed it. She did briefly mention healthcare. She said she wants accessible and affordable healthcare. But that is essentially code for anything but Medicare for all. Whenever we hear a Democrat talk about accessible and affordable healthcare, they mean not Medicare for all. Other policies she talked about include, quote, human rights, reproductive rights, workers' rights to earn a living wage, that's good, and women's rights codified in the U.S. Constitution. That's great, but that's the only set of policies she brought up in a nearly 11-minute speech, and this speech came after she announced her candidacy. The rest of her speech was essentially, Trump's a racist, we're the resistance, yada yada yada, but simply calling Donald Trump a racist does nothing for the constituents in Nevada's 4th Congressional District. I mean, I shouldn't have to tell you this, because you're already a politician. So if you're going to be running to represent a group of people, your constituents, then you have to tell them what policies you're going to push for that would improve their lives. Saying Trump is a racist does nothing to improve their lives. It just makes you feel better. So like I did with Stephen Horsford, I actually went to her website as well to see if I could find any more policies, and at face value, it looks like she did list a couple of policies here, but when you read them, most of these points are actually about herself. So for example, under renewable energy, you'd think that she'd lay out a comprehensive plan that she would push for if she did get elected to get America off of its oil dependency and instead move towards renewable energy. But of course, this little headline here is just about Pat. It states, Pat earned a DBA with a focus on renewable energy and is a widely respected speaker on the subject. Okay, great, but what's her stance on renewable energy? That tells us nothing. Also, when it comes to education, you'd think that she'd maybe lay out some goals for education policy or reform, but instead she states, Pat has served as president of the San Marcos Consolidated School District. Again, that's not what people are coming to your website to find, Pat. They want to know what you think about education with respect to policy. But really, the most telling thing here is healthcare, because she states, quote, healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and we must work to achieve affordable universal healthcare without compromising healthcare benefits for active members of our military, their family members, and veterans. So when you read that, it's clear that Pat really wants you to think that she supports Medicare for all, even though she doesn't. I mean, she even throws in progressive buzzwords like healthcare is a right and, quote, universal. But really, what she's saying here tells us unequivocally that she doesn't support Medicare for all, because if you did support Medicare for all, you just state, I support Medicare for all. So clearly, everything that we know about Pat is that, you know, she thinks Trump is a racist, and she's educated. She's a highly respected speaker with regard to renewable energy, and she loves to espouse platitude, literally the same platitudes that Hillary Clinton used, but she doesn't really talk about policy very frequently. So I don't really know where Pat stands because all she's given us is platitudes. But if you look at her donors, you begin to get a little bit clearer picture as to who Pat Spearman really is. Pat Spearman took $4,500 from AT&T and CenturyLink. She also took $1,500 from Charter and $1,000 from Cox. She also took $2,000 from United Health Group, and United Health Group is a lobbying firm that's so against the expansion of healthcare that they literally lobbied against Obamacare in 2010 and 2011. So Pat Spearman and Stephen Horsford together, these are the people who are considered Amy Vilela's main competitors in the Democratic Party primary in the 4th Congressional District of Nevada. They decided to jump into the race seemingly for no reason. They don't have any policy that is pushing them to run. They don't seem to really know what the people of the 4th Congressional District of Nevada care about. it looks like they just decided to jump in to stop Amy Vilela from winning. I'd say that someone from the establishment probably told them to jump in order to stop Amy Vilela from winning. Now, in raising these objections, I'm not suggesting that they're somehow bad people. In fact, I'm sure that they're lovely people. They seem nice. But Pat Spearman and Stephen Horsford are clearly just puppets of the state Democratic Party establishment. And if I'm out of line here, if I'm incorrect, prove me wrong. Don't take money from a super PAC, Pat and Stephen, and actually endorse policies that a majority of Americans support, like Medicare for All, tuition-free public colleges and universities, but you don't want to do that, do you? Because your donors wouldn't support that. Are you guys going to come out in favor of net neutrality? An issue where the overwhelming majority of Americans, Republicans and Democrats and independents support? Are you going to get out in favor of that and lead the fight? Well, of course not, because you guys have sold out to AT&T and Verizon and whatnot. So Amy Vilela is a candidate that the Democratic Party establishment should have bent over backwards to endorse, and they should have done everything in their power to make sure she has everything she needs to win, because if anybody's going to keep that district blue, it's going to be Amy Vilela. But instead, they decided to presumably throw a couple of establishment puppets into the race to make sure that the progressive doesn't win. And look, it's not like I'm just jumping to conclusions here, because we see this across the country. Democrats have been doing this. They always back the corporate finance candidates because they think that they're more likely to raise more money. I mean, Amy Vilela doesn't take money from super PACs or large multinational corporations. So they want to go with the candidate that's going to keep the gravy train running. That's why they decided to back Pat Spearman or Stephen Horsford. Probably Stephen Horsford is who the National Democratic Party supports, but I take it that the state Democratic Party is really enthusiastic about Pat Spearman. So now is the time that progressives come out and we show that we are a force to be reckoned with. So you can actually support Amy Vilela by visiting amyforthepeople.com. If you donate to her campaign, then that will show the establishment that yes, she is viable because she can raise money and she doesn't even have to take dirty money. So if you're deciding to run for Congress, then you've got to show us that you stand for something. But I'm like against Trump. That's not really something that is going to catalyze your base to get out and vote for you, because guess what? This strategy was tested before by Hillary Clinton, and guess what happened? She lost to a reality TV show star. So if you want to make sure that that district stays blue, support Amy Vilela. Otherwise, you're going to get a joke of a representative there.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.